The Manufacturing Edge, where ops leaders break barriers, drive growth, and redefine what's possible. Welcome back to part 2 of Navigating Tariffs and the Reshoring Opportunity. In this episode, Daniel will discuss with Harry and David if manufacturers should wait and see on the tariff situation or act now to mitigate the risks.
So what do we do? So what's the first step, right? If you have somebody that's out there that's considering this and taking all this information into consideration, do you act now, or do we take a kind of a wait and see approach at this point? What are your thoughts on that?
I think you have to act now. I mean, there's things that you need to be doing as a manufacturer right now. Now, that doesn't mean pick up and move, but there are some research and analysis activities that need to start now.
Yeah, we think of it as insurance. Insurance against the geopolitical risk, but also against substantial tariffs. You know, if you've got the product coming to you from inside the U.S., you know you've avoided both of those problems. And so we would suggest that companies should look at what they're bringing in from the highest risk areas, which would be China from geopolitics and tariffs, and say, of those that are coming in, use our TCO estimator, total cost of ownership estimator, that looks at all the relevant costs and risks, and see which ones are pretty close, where the total cost is very similar, especially if there's a 10 or 20% tariff on it, and analyze those and which ones will be difficult to find a new supplier later if you don't do it now, which ones can be made without tariffed components, because there's a lot of components coming in, you got a problem, and then find an alternate supplier now, preferably in the US, perhaps in Mexico, for example, and develop that relationship with that supplier so that if everything goes to hell and something happens in Taiwan or there's horrible tariffs, you're coming to that supplier and say, hey, I gave you the work in January, now it's March, I really need more. Whereas if you don't give them the work now and you come to them in March, they're going to say, hey, I'm loaded up with work, everybody else is calling me, I can't possibly take care of you. So act now.
And Harry, you have a tool, is that correct, that helps in that regard in terms of the cost?
TCO, total cost of ownership estimator, that starts with the FOB price or ex-works price at the two sources, and then helps the user add in the duty and the freight and the carrying cost of inventory, the intellectual property risk, the geopolitical risk, the Section 301 tariffs, like the existing tariffs, ESG, it quantifies the emissions and the social benefit, and adds all these things in. And what it turns out, even without those latter things, those new things being added in, I had a sample of 190 cases, China versus the US. In 8% of the cases, the US won based on price, in 32% based on total cost, and then 50% if there was a 25% tariff thrown on top. So by doing the math correctly, companies can find out that they're not taking a risk by moving the work back, they're eliminating a risk.
Yeah, and I think, Daniel, think in terms of things that companies need to do now, as I said, there's analysis and plan making that needs to happen right now, and then some companies are already moving production. But something, if you think about things that they can do now, is to understand their current footprint capacity. And when I say footprint, their own within their own company and also their suppliers. What capacity is there to take on additional work? What opportunities for improvement exist that I can offset, even if there's tariffs? Can I offset some of the costs that may be incurred to do so domestically, make production domestically? How risky is my supply chain? Where are those? And sometimes it's going to have to, be working through your suppliers to understand, what does the full supply chain look like? Where are those products coming from? And evaluate the risk of those particular regions relative to the sustainability piece. To start to look at that, there's data available around sustainability of China production or Southeast Asia production versus here. It's much lower in the U.S., obviously, because of the environmental regulations that we have. That adds cost, but it offsets the carbon footprint. So what is that calculus, if you will? And then understanding your stakeholders, employees, owners, customers, how they view the domestic production compared to offshore production, and then do the math. The total cost of ownership tool is a very powerful tool, and the tariffs we believe are coming in some form. I think there's certainly some aspect of this is a bargaining chip, but almost certainly some tariffs are coming in some way. So getting prepared, developing a game plan is what needs to be happening right now.
Just an interesting comment on that. We've started to track companies that have said they're actually moving back or considering moving back because of the threat of the tariffs. And recently, Samsung and LG both announced planning, significantly analyzing moving appliance manufacturer from Mexico to the United States. Hyundai Steel said they're thinking about putting a factory here. So there's definitely companies that are looking at this and saying, I better get in. I better get in before it's too late, so to speak. Because if you wait too long, then it's that much harder to find the facility, find the construction labor, find the workers, find everything else. So it's time to act.
And so, into that point, let's talk about people. We talk about, okay, we want to bring all this back, but I mean, labor and skilled labor is obviously an important piece to that, and something that needs to be taken into consideration. What are some things that companies can or should be doing, or currently are right now, that in order to prepare a workforce to be able to handle this new influx of opportunity?
I'd say as a general overriding thing for the company, for its culture, for its community, is to replace the current college for everyone belief with a good career for everyone. Because it's clear that people who say go through an apprenticeship have an average income about equivalent to that of people who get a bachelor's degree, and yet they don't have the hundreds of thousands of dollars of cost at the beginning, and they start working and getting paid when they're 18 instead of when they're 23. And so there's but the kids don't get told that. The guidance counselors don't even seem to understand it. And so you need to get your local community to get the high schools to be part of your team to encourage people, the youth, to move in your direction in terms of the kind of employees you need. So work with the high schools, the community colleges. To me, the gold standard is apprentice programs, more or less what Germany, Switzerland, Austria have, where in those countries, 60% of the kids go into apprenticeship programs. And so you get really smart kids, get really well trained, and it makes them very competitive. And so we need to get more of that advantage that they have.
Yeah, I would add from a labor standpoint is to optimize what you have now. Just as I said, analyze capacity. What are throughput improvements I can make from a capacity standpoint to prepare for this in existing footprint? Same thing for the existing labor base. The more productive that our labor force is, the better the cost, but it's fewer people I'm ultimately going to have to hire as I bring on additional production. And preparing that workforce and preparing for new workforce through good documentation, standards, training programs, and things like that are also really, really important to retain the labor that you have. And advanced manufacturing has to be a part of this. And so automation should be something that manufacturers are looking at even beyond what they've done in the past. And automating bad processes doesn't help. So making sure the processes work, that they flow well, that they support quality and cost, as well as the customer requirements in terms of delivery, is critical to make sure that you're prepared from a labor standpoint.
So just to add to that, one of my neighbors is Jim Womack. Some of you may know him from Lean Enterprise Institute, probably the guru of Lean. And he talks about lean shoring. And he says if you bring the work back and you put it into the old factory with the old workforce, with the old machinery and the old flow and the old process, you're going to fail again. You're going to offshore it again because it doesn't work. Because that's why you offshore it in the first place. One of the reasons. And so if you're going to bring it back, improve the flow, get some new equipment, train the employees better, engage them better, get them more committed to the objectives of the company. And if you do that, if you lean shore, then reshore will be successful.
David, would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it just affirms what I'm saying about preparing the process and the labor force for this potential reshoring. And if you think about it this way, referring back to Harry's total cost of ownership model, at 50% in a tariff environment, 50% today, companies are going to wind up cheaper if they actually do that. If you then say, I'm going to take another 5 or 10% cost reduction of doing it here because I'm improving my processes, then there you go. It's going to be a much bigger number. And so I think that is a very key point that I love the term lean shoring. Companies moved offshore for a lot of different reasons. But one of the things is that they didn't make the effort to be very productive at that time. Today, companies and industries have had to do that. And so they can take advantage of that, but then go even the next step. So new equipment, automation, making sure my equipment functions as well as it should allows me to get the most benefit for the labor force that I have. Because we know labor is constrained here already. So the more this happens, the more constrained it's going to be.
I'd add something to that. If you say you've got a product and you're getting it out of China for 7 and you think it used to cost you 10 here, and you come to the equipment suppliers and say, can you get my manufacturing costs down by 30%, knowing it's not just labor, but also material and burden? Can you get my costs down by 30 and still get a 2-year payback on the millions of dollars worth of equipment? That's pretty tough. So if you look just at price or manufacturing costs, almost impossible to justify. Whereas if you look at total cost of ownership, and now there's only a 5% difference between the two, now the chance of both overcoming that 5% difference and getting a good return on the capital equipment is substantial. So encourage you to use the TCO for that analysis also. And the TCO estimator is on our website, free to use. All you have to do is sign up and sign in and use it. And I bless you for doing so.
It's interesting, David. I mean, we're talking about this. I like it, lean shoring, and we're talking about, hey, we've had an existing infrastructure and an existing way of doing business, and from a manufacturing standpoint here in the United States, and that by coming back on, back on shore, that we can't just regurgitate or do business as usual, right? That things have got to change. And so, David, I know I'm putting you here on the spot, but I mean, is it reasonable to think that there's some gains from a production standpoint or from an efficiency standpoint? Is that really capable or possible with with lean and lean manufacturing? Have you seen some of those results, or is there an example that you can share of somebody who's seen results through changing the way that they've done business in the past?
Yeah, I mean, there's tons of examples. And one, I would go back to that the American economy and America in general has responded to challenges very strongly and has always come out on top. Even increase in industrialization is part of World War II. And all the things that came out of that, training within industry and all of that kind of thing, that was a response to a challenge. This is a new global challenge. And I think companies here in the US will be able to respond to this challenge in a very, very strong way. Often innovation is a result of a problem or a challenge that we face. And so I think about all of the different opportunities that will present themselves to get new levels of advanced manufacturing, new levels of productivity. Without a doubt, that's going to happen. The other thing is we see those kind of improvements all the time. A lot of the companies that we work with have challenges of a different nature, not necessarily reshoring, in everyday safety, quality, delivery, cost challenges. The answer very often is, back to the basics, fundamental manufacturing, and then getting better at those fundamentals, getting better at the blocking and tackling, not silver bullets. A repeating refrain through my manufacturing career. And I think if you look back at the challenges presented in some of the early books, like Jim Womack's Lean Thinking, it's kind of the same thing today. How do we overcome this challenge? I think that's the case. We have a number of case studies around that very thing, Daniel.
Let me add to that. The condition that's typical today where the U.S. company is doing its engineering, say somewhere in the Midwest, and it's doing its manufacturing somewhere in Asia or India, it's difficult for those two teams, the engineering and the manufacturing team, to optimize. Whereas if you put them in the same factory, or at least in the same town or the same city, then the engineers and the manufacturing engineers, the product engineers, they can optimize the design of the product so it's manufacturable, and they can optimize the manufacturing process so it makes what the design engineers designed. So there's a huge advantage Pisano and Shi from Harvard Business School have identified, showing that by having engineering and manufacturing near each other, that benefits both of them. So to make everything work well, keep them together, preferably here.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think, one industry example is electronic components. Uh, a lot of electronic component manufacturers are moving things back to the U.S. They've already started reshoring effort because they can benefit from advanced manufacturing. It is a very long lead time to make changes imposed by supply chain risk. So they're already making those moves. And, where they've started is improving the current processes, then automating those processes, and then building plants, bringing on suppliers, expanding plants, current plants' footprints and capacity. Those things are happening. They're seeing the benefits of that.
Harry, how might sales teams, how should they be preparing for tariffs?
Almost the way the procurement people do. If you know we offer which of your prospects or existing customers are importing substantial amounts of the things that you make, that's a great time to go to them and say, hey, there's geopolitical risk, there's tariff risk. Wouldn't it make sense now, while we have some capacity available, to have you start buying from us those things that you're now importing? So a service called the Import Substitution Program, where a company can identify a product that they're really good at making, and we can tell them who the biggest importers are of those products, what tonnage they're bringing in, whom they're buying them from offshore, roughly what they're paying for them. And then our client can do the TCO calculation and go to that importer and say, hey, I've done the math. Looks to me like you're going to be better off if you buy from us instead of importing. And you'll eliminate the tariff risk and the geopolitical risk and travel and all this other stuff. Let's make this work out for both of us. There's definitely things that can be done. We'd recommend companies also on their website, especially contract manufacturer or supply chain companies, on their website have something about reshoring. Do you want to get back to just in time? Are you worried about stocking out? Are you having quality issues? Worried about geopolitics? What have you? Here's how we can help you address those issues and get life back to more or less how it was before COVID. The sales team can learn from the same tools.
Well, we've covered a lot here. And kind of as a wrap up, are there any other additional insights or learnings or topics that we need to talk about in this specific forum that we failed to, or maybe that we need to dive into a little deeper before we finish here today?
Well, we're doing a survey that's going to come out this week, and we're going to make it available through the firm. And I hope the listeners will fill it out and describe their experience with reshoring or lack of experience. But also, very interestingly, I think how you would respond if the Trump administration implemented the things that it's promised, like lower corporate tax rates, tariffs, all these things, deportation. How would you respond? And then we're going to pull together all of your responses and get them into the Trump administration so they can see what you believe will be the impact of the actions that they're proposing. I'm going to have this to the firm today or tomorrow, and they're going to put it out, and I hope you'll use it.
Absolutely. David?
Yeah, the only thing I would add, Daniel, is Harry talked about different things that they can do to help manufacturers prepare for tariffs and the need to reshore. We work with bread and butter to help companies be more productive, have better safety, have better quality, lower cost, increase throughput, achieve delivery. But the other thing is, as this happens, thinking outside the box in terms of the four walls I have today, expansion, relocation. Maybe that relocation's cost within the domestic boundaries. Maybe it's because of labor availability in other parts of the country than I operate today, tax benefits, things like that. We help companies with relocations in addition to improving the current operations. So there's a lot of work that we do around plant layout, site situation, things like that, using simulation and other tools that make those moves as best and as smooth as they can possibly be, and achieve lower cost and lower project costs as well.
Covered a lot of ground, and it seems to me, I think it goes without saying that this is a long-term strategy, not a short-term strategy. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. But it's one that you need to start.
There's short-term tactics and there's long-term strategy, I guess, and the two have to work together. But there's, as I've repeatedly said, there's a huge amount of risk out there. You have to take the actions now, or you're exposed to the risk.
Absolutely. Well, I think that that's going to wrap up our podcast for today. I want to thank both of you. A huge thank you to both Harry Moser and to David Pate for sharing their invaluable insights and practical strategies on this complex and timely topic. From unpacking the potential impacts of tariffs to exploring the benefits and challenges of reshoring, today's discussion was packed with actionable takeaways for manufacturers facing an uncertain future. If you found this episode helpful, don't forget to subscribe and share it with your network. And remember, navigating these challenges isn't about reacting to the headlines. It's about planning ahead, talking to the experts, and making smart, informed decisions for your business. Thanks again for tuning in, and we will talk to you next week.